Welcome to Case Closed, the Contingency Fee Podcast. On the show, our team of industry experts interviews contingency fee attorneys. You will discover everything from how they got started to the secrets of their success and what's working in today's marketplace. And now, here's the Case Closed Podcast.
Welcome to the Case Closed Podcast. I'm your co-host, Michael Clanin. My guest today is Joel Greer from Bradshaw Law office in Marshalltown, Iowa. A little about Joel before we get started. I'm just going to ask him to share his experience and, what his journey was and, what areas of law that he practices in or fortes in. And so, Joel, why don't you share with our listeners a little about you?
Sure. Well, let's see. It started as a pretty general practice, actually. So I did everything except bankruptcy. And that included criminal cases, divorces, federal multi-district litigation, product liability, and things like that. And now at age 70, I have kind of narrowed it down to just doing civil litigation cases, primarily on the defense side. The first part of my practice, when I was in Northwest Iowa, actually was more on the plaintiff side. And I did have a medical malpractice case that kind of launched my career as a litigator on the plaintiff side.
Oh, wow. Great.
I quit doing criminal about 20 years ago, and my last divorce was 4 years ago with a couple that had over 20 rescue dogs. I thought there was going to be no custody battle. Oh, was I wrong?
That was wrong. That was just a little curveball, right?
Oh, yeah. She forgot the damn dogs.
Oh my gosh. So, and talking with you before we started this podcast, I also learned that you are also the mayor of Marshalltown. So, how long have you been doing that role?
Well, to be cheeky about it, 5 years, 7 months, 30 days.
How many hours? I really want the hours.
Yeah, no, I've got about 2.5 years left on a 4-year term.
Oh, wow. So you are a busy guy, not only in your practice, but, giving back to your city, basically, and that. So can you describe your experience in civil litigation, including notable cases in insurance defense? You did mention the medical malpractice and personal injury.
Sure. Well, the medical malpractice case was, at the time, it was the largest verdict against a doctor in Iowa, and that was in 1984. Bad case, botched birth with really serious injuries. And so the verdict really, even though it was high for Iowa, wasn't big enough for the family to keep the little girl in good enough care all of her life. So that was a learning experience. I've had a couple cases in that field since then, but never one that went to trial. And I actually defended some after that. When I was working in Spencer, Iowa, we did some kind of high-profile cases that involved multi-district litigation. There was a yellow sheet antitrust type of case against IBP, and some fairly interesting theft of seed corn cases, one resulting in a $10 million verdict against one of the seed companies near Cedar Rapids, actually. And so that was kind of fun. I ended up on the IAJ is what they call it now, Iowa Association of Justice. Back then it was the Iowa Trial Lawyers Association Board, and ended up being a vice president there. When we started having children, we moved back to Sharon's hometown area in Marshalltown here, and this was an insurance defense firm, so that became my primary focus of litigation. So since moving here, I ended up on the Iowa Defense Council Board. Sharon was the president of that years before that. And the practice has been pretty much insurance defense litigation. It involves some fairly big contract cases. I've had oddly enough, a cattle loss case that the demand was over $2 million down in Poweshiek County. And then some very interesting personal injury cases and explosion cases, things like that.
Right. Wow. So across the gamut, it sounds like.
Mm-hmm.
Could you share a memorable or challenging case from your, I believe you've had 168 jury trials that went to verdict?
Actually, 173.
173 now, so you were a little behind.
Yeah, well, I had a wild year and a half ago. I had 3 jury trials in 3 weeks in a row. The first was a serious personal injury case. The second was a $250,000 breach of contract between contractor subcontractor case, and the third one was another big personal injury case. I don't know how I survived that, honestly, but that is how it's crept up to the 173 level. In terms of challenging, I don't know. I had a huge verdict against my client in a personal injury case that was the biggest shock I've ever had. And fortunately, that one resulted in a mistrial, so we were able to settle the case. But sometimes, actually, back in the divorce arena, those were more challenging. If I limited my practice to representing the party I thought I'd have primary physical care, it was sometimes a real challenge, especially if I was representing the dad and the mom was okay. Those were the toughest cases I've actually handled.
Right. Right. One of your most memorable cases that you think about a lot.
I've written my first draft of the book, actually.
Hey, congratulations.
And so what I wanted to do before I forgot all these things is capture the things that were funny and interesting. And so the 2 stories that come to mind, one involves a pizza dough rolling case where my client got her hand into the cover device that was supposed to keep male hands out of it, but didn't keep female hands out of it. And her orthopedic surgeon was testifying. First time he'd ever testified, but he was a really good testifier and a really good doctor. And he, when he left the witness chair, he took the wrong door. He could have gone out the back door that would have taken him into the hallway and gotten out of the courthouse. Instead, he went into the supply closet behind the jury, and he shut the door. And of course, the jury and the judge and all the lawyers knew, he's in the closet. And he waited in there about 5 seconds, which felt like 5 minutes, and came out and sheepishly kind of looked around and went through the right door. And so that case is just remarkable just because it was such a big laugh, and everybody laughed, including my client. His hand was hurt. And then another one was one of those typical slip and fall cases on ice. It was a professor over at Iowa State University who had blown his hand off when he was 18 years old in a science experiment, but he had built the device that would allow him to pick up a single sheet of paper off the table. I was pretty proud of that. And the jury had heard about all of this beforehand. The case involved, he was trying to walk from his doctor's office to the hospital over in Nevada and jumped over my client's one piece of kind of icy sidewalk and broke his ankle, I think it was, or other wrist, something like that.
Right.
Anyway, when it was time for him to testify, Judge Moon, who's one of my favorite now retired judges, said, Professor, would you stand up here and would you raise your right? Would you swear and affirm to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth? And even the professor laughed at that one too. So those 2 cases stand out as more interesting, funny things happen.
Right. Oh, yeah, definitely. Right. Yeah. You got to find humor. And some people don't think there's humor in things that happen, because it's always, negative, or, you know what I mean? And that. So what key insights have you gained from handling approximately 38 appeals in various legal areas?
Well, on the appeals, I have learned making your record is absolutely pivotal. And I've tried a lot of cases against lawyers that did not know that. And the appeals are tougher when the record isn't very well made. Since my wife is an appeals court judge, I kind of vicariously get that reminder of the lawyers that aren't making the record, aren't making the motions. They don't, if there's a ruling on a motion in limine, they forget that they still need to make the objection during the trial and that sort of thing. So that's one thing I learned on handling appeals. Another one is, my best appeal brief was my shortest. And it worked. And it took me a lot of time to cut it down to really being short. I didn't waste any words or paragraphs in that brief. And the argument was pretty short. And so I'm proudest of it. It wasn't a big case. But I did learn that was better to take that time and shorten it like that. If I'm writing an appeal brief and don't have a lot of time, it tends to be too long and too repetitive. And I know
Sure.
now from the woman I sleep with, that doesn't sell well.
Right. So speaking of that, not about the sleeping, but you said your wife is a judge.
She's
Did I hear that?
Iowa Court of Appeals. Right?
Oh, okay. All right. So does that how does that come into play between you two? Like, meaning, does she do cases that you do that you represent?
She would recuse herself from anything I
Right.
had anything to do with, and
Right.
the judges have to recuse themselves from handling anything that the law firm they had been associated with, at least for a year later. But most of the judges I know do a lifetime recusal from not taking
Right.
cases that they had been involved in with
Right.
firms that they've been involved in.
So do you
And then what it really means is I
yeah.
never have the last word.
Right. Like, are you able to ask her for advice about cases since she's not representing or
I can do that. She has to
okay.
be circumspect about what advice she
Right.
can get,
Right.
actually.
Right. Okay. No,
I-
that's that's kind of unusual, right? Yeah.
It is. I can also give her advice. Generally, if there's a
But
case on appeal involving something I'm familiar with, nothing keeps me from
here's the
telling her.
question. Does she overrule you?
If you had asked what percentage that happens in the law versus what happens in decorating our home or that sort of thing, I'm not sure how I would answer it.
Right. It might not be good to answer. Just say, that's interesting. Right.
Yeah.
That's a good
Actually,
question.
before she was appointed to the Court of Appeals, we practiced from the day she was, she had an interesting week when we were married.
Yeah.
She took the bar exam on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We had a rehearsal dinner on Friday. We were married on Saturday and in Marshall County here. And then on Sunday, we were up in Clay County, up in Spencer, having a wedding anniversary for my folks' 40th. And we did our honeymoon and came back. And 2 weeks later, she started practicing with me in Dad's firm. And so until she was appointed to the Court of Appeals about 4 years ago, she and I worked together.
Okay.
And we had one case together involving custody, modification of custody. And during that case, Judge Hamilton from Spirit Lake pulled us up to the bench and said, if you guys don't start getting along better, you're going to each need your own divorce lawyer. So we agreed we would never work on the same case at the same time again.
Right.
And we never did. But it was handy because if she had depositions in one case and couldn't do a hearing in another case, I could sub for her, she could sub for me. And we did that all the time.
Oh,
As long as we weren't in a courtroom together,
right.
that worked out very well. And, I never had to worry that she was wondering, why am I working so late on something?
She was doing the same thing, probably.
Or vice versa. And typically she was working later than I was, It's worked out pretty well.
Oh, that's good. That's good. How has your academic background at the University of Iowa influenced your legal career?
Well, I was supposed to go to Stanford undergrad. And a week before classes started, I decided I would probably be an Iowa lawyer. So why didn't I just go to Iowa City instead?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was probably a good choice. I got a good education at the University of Iowa undergrad and probably did let me have more connections. Now, when it was time to apply for law school, I applied to Stanford and they said, no, thanks.
Right.
So I went to Iowa Law School, but I think that helped as well. And so I don't know if you've got my resume. I ended up being the president of the Iowa Alumni Association, and then I have been on the Iowa Law School Foundation board. So I've kept up the connections. We are literally driving tonight over to Iowa City.
Oh, okay.
Program Alan Page, who was one hell of a football player and is on the Minnesota Iowa Supreme Court, is the speaker. And it's like, well, we can't miss that one. That's
right.
too interesting. So
right.
That's where we're going tonight. So we've kept up the connections with the University of Iowa, and it has not hurt in the legal career to have those connections, I think. Now, Sharon was Iowa State undergrad and wrestling cheerleader. So we tend to go to the football and basketball games over in Ames too. And so we have those connections. The undergrad in either one of those universities has probably helped most of us that are in the law here practicing.
Right. Right. Especially being in Iowa, staying in Iowa. So how have memberships in organizations like Phi Beta Kappa and the American College of Trial Lawyers impacted your professional growth?
Well, the Iowa Academy of Trial Lawyers is kind of the fun one to talk about because Dad ended up being the president of it years ago. He was also the president of the International Society of Barristers, which is kind of crazy when you figure he's practicing in a town of 11,000. I was happy to get admitted into it and then delighted to become the president of the Iowa Academy as well. It's limited to 250 lawyers. There are 9,000 lawyers admitted to practice in Iowa. The cap is 250 lawyers in the academy. So you have to have enough trial experience and not have honked off enough judges or opponents to get blackballed. And so I was kind of pleased to get in. And then believe it or not, Sharon was elected to be the incoming president of the Iowa Academy of Trial Lawyers too. And so when her vice president year was happening, she was in charge of getting the program put together, which is where you have to do all the work.
Right.
And right before she got to take the gavel to be the president, the governor appointed her to the Iowa Court of Appeals. So she had to step aside and the next incoming person had to be the president. But we would have kept that one in the family pretty well.
Sure.
And what that does is it lets us know and rub elbows with at least annually, but sometimes oftener than that, with the best trial lawyers in Iowa. And that not only is instructive and good for referrals to each other, and that's it's just a lot of fun. I mean, the best lawyers in Iowa tend to have good senses of humor and are interesting people outside the law. So we just delight in going to the Iowa Academy meetings. Well, we're both in the American College of Trial Lawyers too. That's top of 0.5%. And so nationally, we get to rub elbows with the best lawyers in that country. Those events are just delightful, fun. We come home with stomachs hurting from laughing so much. Well, I also learned stuff. You know, the speakers at these things are really good.
Right. And I'm guessing you've been a speaker probably at some point of those?
Not nationally, but I have. I've been a kind of a frequent speaker at the Academy and trial lawyers and defense counsel things. Yeah.
Right. Can you discuss your contributions as president of the Iowa Bar Association and the Iowa Academy of Trial Lawyers?
That's a good question.
That's a good question, right?
I've never had to answer that one. I can tell you what my goal was, and I think I accomplished it. It was to leave the organization a little better than I found it when I started. The thing I wanted to do for the Iowa State Bar Association was make the monthly article that you have to write interesting enough that people actually read it start to finish. And I think I did that. Some of them were funny, some were pretty serious, but gripping. And so I met my goal to do that. We didn't have any major challenges. Nothing as tough right now as the budget crunch and trying to keep the court-appointed lawyers getting a salary that at least lets them keep their lights on. And we didn't have the attacks on the judiciary when I was the president of the state bar. So that was, I probably had an easy year. Well, I had several jury trials that year, and I was without an assistant for about 2 months. So that was a challenge to get everything done.
Right.
For the Iowa Academy of Trial Lawyers, that one is an organization that pretty well runs itself, and we had good staff people. There wasn't any, I didn't really have any major agenda item to put forward there, but I didn't get arrested and didn't embarrass the organization while I was the president of it.
How have you witnessed the evolution of the legal landscape, particularly in areas like insurance defense, medical malpractice?
Well, I learned in medical malpractice, by the way, in that lawsuit I told you about at the start, I lost 19 pounds and resumed smoking and turned down a big offer and took a big risk. And then we ended up with a big verdict and we were lucky. But the first vote by the jury was more for the doctor than for our clients. And so that told me that malpractice cases are tough to win, and they are. And statistically, they're still, I think it's about an 80% chance of losing a malpractice case if you're the plaintiff in Iowa. Although the other trend that's happened lately, especially after COVID, is the verdicts, the ones that win kind of big. So we're seeing some huge numbers that we hadn't seen before.
Right.
My
right.
verdict back in '84 with interest was just under $1 million, but we're seeing 20, 25 million, that sort of thing now. So it kind of takes my breath away.
Yeah, it's hard to fathom that, isn't it? I mean, that's a big difference from back then to now.
It is. I still don't make the adjustment to, what should a car cost or a home cost with adjusted for inflation these days.
Right.
But that's been interesting. In terms of insurance defense litigation, I just fired one of the insurance companies 2 weeks ago. I said I'm not doing any more of your cases. I'll finish the ones I've got, but the way that the industry has gone made it less and less fun. And so where I was accustomed to doing my own medical reviews and summaries, and I'm good at them, and I've never had a staff person do them as well as I think I can. And I think that's important for the client. I've had nurses who did reviews. When I went through the records, I could find something they didn't that really was important, and I latched onto it, and it made a difference. Well, this carrier doesn't pay for the lawyers to do that. And so that was one problem that I had with it. The reporting requirements are pretty stringent, and it seems to me if they trust me to handle a case, they should trust me to let them know what they need to know when they need to know it, instead of every so many months or whatever. And then people I was dealing with had, when I started with that company, they were local, they were in Iowa, we knew each other, we trusted each other. Not one of them that I have cases pending for right now is anywhere close to Iowa. They're in different time zones. They don't understand who I am, where I am geographically, how I know what a different county in a different district is likely to compare to another county in another district, because I've tried cases in all of the districts. And so it got to the point where it just wasn't that much fun anymore. And the firm didn't want to continue to take the cases and have the younger lawyers handle them either.
Well, let's talk about that. So what advice do you have for aspiring attorneys aiming to make an impact in their careers and communities?
Well, the best attorneys I know, and the ones that really do excel, don't just try lawsuits, which you have to do. No insurance company will take you seriously if you're a plaintiff's lawyer if you don't try the lawsuits and get in front of a jury and get some results. And frankly, if you're a defense attorney and you're losing trying cases, that's not going to be too good for you either. So you got to try the cases. But the best attorneys I know also give back to the bar, get involved in the bar associations. They're on the bench bar conference. They're helping the community out. I'm not the first lawyer that's been a mayor in town here. I follow something like 5 former mayors were lawyers, and they were really, really good lawyers, and they were good mayors. And I know Sioux City and Cedar Rapids and other big cities have had lawyer mayors. So that gives them a little more breadth than the lawyers that just practice and just clock in. And there are some I know that try lawsuits. They just don't have much of a life outside of that. But I would say to a young lawyer coming out of law school, if you want to be a litigator, find a way to get into the courtroom. That may require doing criminal cases at the start, frankly. And then also don't forget there's another world out there, and your law degree gives you some power to help your community and help your organization and do other things.
Are there any upcoming projects or cases that you're enthusiastic about sharing with our audience?
Actually, I have the lightest caseload coming up that I've ever had in my lifetime in terms of the stakes. They're pretty much car accident cases, slip and fall cases. I don't have any interesting product liability case. I'm not working on any medical malpractice case. I do have one legal malpractice case. We started that one 2 weeks ago, and there was a mistrial before the second question was asked in voir dire. So that one's going to be retried in November. And so I do look forward to that one, because I think it's be a slam dunk, and gets published to my opponent. He'll not like that, but it will be. in terms of looking forward to things, that's probably going to be the most interesting, but it's the first one coming up. I usually do have one that's got an interesting fact pattern, and we tend to name cases.
Okay.
We give them a theme that somehow involves the type of case or the plaintiff's name or something like that.
So give us an example. Like, what's one that comes to mind?
Well, one that I did was an appeal by the pro se plaintiff was a gentleman named Heidi, who was arrested for going the wrong way in a one-way street. Turns out he was also intoxicated, and when he was calling his lawyer, it was recorded. You could hear his part of the conversation on the phone asking his lawyer if he knew what peyote was, which wasn't a good idea. And then while the case was pending on appeal, he applied for informa pauperis to have the defendant have to pay for the transcript of the hearing that we had because he didn't have a job. And then his next motion was for a continuance of his filing deadline because it was harvest time. And I thought, well, that was kind of interesting. I don't have a job or any money, but now I need additional time to harvest. And then what I figured was it wasn't corn or beans or rye that he was probably harvesting. His name was Heidi. And so we called that one the Heidi Ho case.
Yeah, no. Last question. What are your thoughts on the future of the legal profession, including anticipated trends and challenges?
Well, the big worry right now, and I know this because at the Iowa Defense Council meeting, it was a topic of discussion. We had a good lawyer from out east come in to talk about what is AI going to do to the profession. And our bench bar conference, I'm on that committee still and chaired that a couple times in the years past. We're going to be looking at kind of the same topic. Will we still be writing briefs and that sort of thing? The most interesting trend to me was watching that we went from being hired to do a lot of legal research to having the Fortune 500 companies going out of the country to Pakistan or Bangladesh or wherever they could have legal research done by people who were not lawyers, but were really brilliant and could do it. And so Fortune 500 companies were going that way. So I do fear a little bit that the brief writing and arguments and things like that might shift into AI and require less lawyer work. But I'm convinced that the system will always need people that can have common sense and analyze the facts and know the lay of the land and persuade people. And that's why there will always be lawyers.
Right.
So I'd say don't fear going to law school. I was encouraged to see that the law school class this year at Iowa has the highest grade point and the highest average LSAT score ever. So it's still popular. People who are still well qualified are getting into it. And to the extent that litigation isn't as common as it used to be, and mediation seems to be more common, well, we need people that can mediate.
Right. Oh, yeah. Is there anything else, Joel, that you want to share with our listeners about you, your practice, or anything?
I can't think of anything, honestly. I haven't been actively drumming up business and looking for work. I've gotten more and more selective as I've gotten older.
Sure, definitely.
Actually, I am a really good resource, though, about if I'm not going to handle something, who could? Because I haven't been the president of the bar and of the academy. I kind of know which lawyers are on their game, which areas of the state. Right.
So you've built a lot of relationships, and I'm sure you have a lot of people coming to you for advice, and you're going to steer them in the right direction. And you'd be a person I'd come to now. Because it sounds like you know a lot of people in different areas.
Michael, don't get arrested. Don't call me at 2 a.m.
That's the best advice, right? Right. That's well, Joel, thank you very much for joining us and agreeing to do the Case Closed podcast with us. So I've been your host for the Case Closed podcast, and I've been talking with Joel Greer from Bradshaw Law in Marshalltown, Iowa. So if you'd like to learn more about Joel or Bradshaw Law, how can our listeners find you on the internet?
It is bradshawlaw.com, actually.
Okay,
actually,
easy enough.
If you Google my name, you'll hide well.
Yeah, and also your mayor will come up too, because when I Googled you, it brought up mayor. So, well, thank you so much for being our guest today on the Case Closed podcast. and look forward to future Case Closed podcast. This has been your host, Michael Clanin. Thank you very much, Joel.
Thank you, Michael. Bye now.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Case Closed, the Contingency Fee Podcast. We hope you enjoyed listening to this week's guests and their insight. If you liked what you heard, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts. Case Closed, the Contingency Fee Podcast, is led by industry experts who unlock insights from the nation's top contingency fee attorneys. Each week on the show, the guests share how they got started, secrets of their success, and what's working in today's marketplace. Guests on the Case Closed podcast include successful contingency fee attorneys that will share their secrets so you can close more cases. Tune in each week for a dynamic conversation about winning legal strategies that will grow your business.